thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Hicks. I am a professor in the philosophy department where I'm also the chair, and I'm also one of the co-creators of our new program launching this fall in science, technology, and ethics. It's hard to believe that it's been less than 2.5 years since OpenAI made its large language model, ChatGPT, open to the general public. It seems like practically overnight, educators at all levels have had to confront, on the one hand, the possibility of online systems freely available that can produce a whole college essay in a few seconds. But on the other hand, the potential for pretty radical changes in white collar work across our entire economy. Teachers at all levels have had a lot of discussions over the past 2.5 years about what this technology means for us and for our students. And actually, the philosophy department had one of these conversations last August at our first faculty meeting of the new academic year. And in that conversation, I was struck by 3 things. So first of all, as you may know, the philosophy department here is very small. There's only a handful of us. But even within this small group, there was a wide range of views on AI and large language models and the implications they had for our teaching. Second, most of the other conversations that I've seen or observed have been really one-sided. You can get events where everyone there is, to some degree or another, a supporter of these technologies, or I'm involved in a lot of conversations on social media that are very strongly opposed to them. But there are almost no conversations that I've encountered that really bring together both supporters and skeptics. Third, within the department, we have a really unusual combination of expertise that's highly relevant to this technology and its implications. So I had the idea, basically while we were having that conversation back in August, of putting together a public event where we could showcase some of that expertise, show what philosophers have to contribute to these discussions in a way that would bring together supporters, skeptics, people who are undecided, but also beyond just our department, really include the entire campus and create a kind of discussion that I haven't been able to find anywhere else, much less anywhere else here at UC Merced. So here's how things are going to work today. We have 3 panelists. They will each speak for about 10 minutes, laying out some explanation of what these technologies are, their views of the ethical implications and the implications, not just for society, but also for education specifically. That will be roughly the first half hour or so. And at that point, we will open it up to you all. We will have somewhere between a open question and answer period where you can ask the panelists anything that's on your mind, or share your own perspective, the way that you've engaged with this technology, the implications that you see in your education, whether you're a teacher, student, or someone else, and implications that you might see for society more in general. So to introduce our speakers first, we have Jeff Yoshimi, who is one of the founding faculty here at UC Merced. He's been here from the very beginning. And he has a joint appointment in philosophy and cognitive science. So he has a degree of technical expertise that he's going to use to provide us with a bit of introduction, along with his discussion of how he deploys these technologies in his classes, in his field. And then did we decide Rose is next or Hannah's next? Yeah. So then, to really include perspectives from across the entire campus, we invited a friend of the department, Professor Rosemarie Bongers from Applied Math, who's also head of the Data Science and Computing program. And she's going to talk about sort of the way this is changing the way, teaching programming, software engineering, and data analysis, along with, again, some of those ethical and social implications. And then finally, Professor Hanna Gunn, who's in the philosophy department, she specializes in the areas of social epistemology, that is the way knowledge works in a complex social system, but also the ethics of technology. And she's going to bring those perspectives together in our final kind of introductory discussion to share her perspective. So to start things off, please join me in welcoming Professor Jeff Yoshimi.
Thank you, Dan. Good to see you all. Thank you to my esteemed co-panelists. All right, so we've got 10 minutes. I'm going to give you a very, very quick introduction to large language models and this new age of generative AI we're moving into, and a very quick take on my view on the ethics of these, which is basically a mixed view, but maybe a little more optimistic than Hannah's, so we'll get a little nice little spice happening here. All right, so first, large language models. So I want to say, first of all, what I'm going to show you is, I'd say, my main contribution to this from a research perspective. I have an interest in visualizing complex processes. I think that democratic deliberations about emerging technologies that affect us are at their best if people understand the technologies that affect them. So we have some kind of ethical mandate to produce, constructibles, visualizable, easy to access kinds of tools that make it easy for anybody to understand how these things work under the hood. This should not be just hidden behind corporate doors or, in the minds of only a few experts. As much as everybody can understand it, the more people understand it, the better. Okay, so here we go. This is SimBrain. I often call this my fourth child. I've been building it for over 25 years now. And my students will be quite familiar with this, and a number of others. Rachel's dealt with deployment more than once on this. So let me just run, since we don't have much time, I'm going to start with this one. This is the MNIST image classifier. And so this is a neural network. So it's modeled kind of on how our brain works. This is the input layer. So all feed-forward neural networks will take a vector or a list of numbers as inputs, do a bunch of processing, and spit out a list of numbers as output. So a kind of vector-to-vector transformation. The input here is a digitized version of the number 9. They scanned what somebody wrote down. And right now, this should be turned on right now. It should be classifying this as a 9. But these weights here are random, and so it has no idea what's going on. It's a little baby neural network that doesn't know anything. So we will just train it here live and see it. I'll just go through a few of these. It has no idea what it's looking at. And if we press this button here, we see this blue line going down, which is this training error. And this is based on calculus. It's an optimization procedure that slowly updates all the weights and parameters of the neural network so that it will map the digits, the written digits, to their class labels. And once it gets below 0.5, it's doing kind of good enough. Not so good here. It's thinking that's a 4. So neural networks do hallucinate and make mistakes. It got that one right, that it's a 9. It got that one right, and so forth. It's not sure if that one is 6 or an 8. Okay, so that's the basic idea with these, right? I showed it some examples of images of numbers paired with the numbers that they should be labeled as. I trained it for just a few minutes or even less, and it did okay. And I could actually put in new images that it had never seen before in its training set. And, I don't know if I should do this live. This is always dangerous. I will try, though, to draw a 2. It does very poorly on this, actually. But there's a 2. I don't know if it's gonna, all right, it failed. Okay, right. This is not, the 2 I just drew is not like the 2s in its data. So it was not able to generalize well. But with more training examples, with better data, it would do better. All right, so that's how that works. Let's now move to actually, let me go back to the PowerPoints for a second. So a large language model, or a language model in general, is the same basic idea. It takes inputs in the form of a bunch of numbers, does a bunch of processing, and spits out more inputs in the form of more numbers. It's that basic structure again. The trick is just taking, to get chat out of it, you have a structure like this. You have a context window, where the place where you type in your prompt, hello, how are you, ChatGPT? That is converted to numbers. It's pumped through this network, and more numbers come out, which are converted into a prediction of the most probable next token. A token is a word card, or punctuation. So good comes out, that's a likely thing that could be said next. It's added back to the context window, And then that is converted back to numbers and pumped back through. So that new context is fed back in, and another word is predicted, or another token is predicted, and the cycle continues. All right, that's it. So what you say, what it says, and what you say again in one session, that whole long chat session, it's constantly getting this bigger and bigger input that's being fed in to spit out the conversation. So, but it's the same, the kind of upshot is it's the same basic thing as we saw with that image classification example. So now let me run this. And we'll see in a second, ChatGPT was trained on a tremendous amount of data. I think I have this up here. I'm going to train it on this data, which is 10 lines of conversation. Molly was involved in this, who's in our audience here. I just talked to the class. What'd you do over spring break? Went to Oregon. All right, so just a few little lines of conversation. We'll just train it on this, okay? So I'll go back here. This is this is an assignment that students are doing right now. So, okay, we can't quite see everything. So it's the same basic format. There's an input, there's a bunch of weights, there's a more fancy kind of internal processing, and then the outputs are possible next tokens, possible next words or word parts. Bless you. So I could ask it, hello, how are you? And run it, and it's all garbage because think about, at, congrats, congrats, congrats. Because the weights are random, it's a baby neural network. So we can now train it. This takes a little longer. It's still not going to be very good in the time we have, but you can see it's the same gradient descent process. It's incrementally updating the weights to try and be able to predict the next words just in that little set of strings I gave it. And I'll maybe let it get a little below 1. We're not going to see a very good output, most likely. All right, maybe we'll get lucky, but we'll probably see little fragments of conversation-like things. So it at least gives you a sense of how this kind of thing works. All right, so that's low enough, I think, to get something. So now we ask it, hello, how are you? I went to Oregon. Oregon, yes, Oregon, all right. And put a period at the end, okay? So we have a little bit of fragment of kind of meaningful stuff. Now, that was a very small training data set. GPT-3, which is pretty outdated by current standards, was trained on this data. The majority of it is common crawl, so spiders go out on the web. Anything publicly in the public or officially accessible is entered into it. That's 60% of the training data. Basically, everything on the internet with a giant subset of the internet, a vast amount of information. If you posted something on a Usenet list back in the 90s, maybe that was part of the training data, or in the 2000s or whatever. All of Wikipedia, lots of books, all the great books, all of Western and non-Western literature. It's all on there. It was used to train this thing. And that's basically how it works. And I think, again, I think UC Merced is one of the first places, I flatter myself, to have lessons where students could go in and train one of these things themselves and get a direct, embodied, kind of constructivist feel for how they work. I'm sure other universities are doing similar things, and I think we ought to see more of that. All right, now I've just got 2 slides on the ethics of the situation as I understand it, and I'm going to start with 2 ideas, 2 models of the goals of education that are actually from a paper that Hanna turned me on to from Jeff Cox. And Cox gives 3, I'm going to use 2 of these. One model of the goal of education is to make us be makers, right? This is this idea that, you spend a long time learning about Russian history or, architecture or whatever, and you get it into the real neural network in your brain, right? It takes a lot of work, right? GPT is not going to do that for you, right? You just labor over understanding things until it's just in there and with you for the rest of your life, right? This is a kind of Deweyan model, right? We engage, we act, we're with the stuff that we're studying, we care about it, and it goes into our brain. It goes from the world into our brains in some sense, and it's with us for life. In mathematics, you could imagine a good example of this. There's actually a concept in Husserl. I'll name drop Husserl there, who's another interest of mine. It's one thing to be able to use the rules for taking derivatives, right? It's another, I'll put the number up there down in front and multiply. It's another thing to do, to see what a derivative is and to work through a limit-based proof of derivatives and really have a feel for it. That's the labor I'm talking about with the first part. The second part is education as a form of helping people to become good tool users, right? And that's obviously important, right? A taxi driver needs to be able to understand how to use, this was an example in seminar the other day, to use a GPS system. Engineers need to be able to know how to use computers well. And there's classes that teach us how to use computers. We're not doing all the thinking. We're thinking in concert with an external device, and me and the device together could do things that neither one of us alone could do, kind of helping cultivate human-machine hybrids, as it were. And so I think we should be, Cox kind of presents this as, you only have one choice, and GPT is making us only be one of the second two. I think we could be pluralist about this. We should teach students to do all these things. And so that high level, that's my view of kind of the education ethics here. Now, we're clearly entering a new age, what you can call the age of generative AI. This is absolutely transforming society in some fundamental way. And I think this is just kind of the obvious approach. I think we ought to be developing appropriate norms, practices, and regulations. I don't think we should just leave this stuff alone and allow anything, but I don't think it's probably premature to just, outlaw it altogether. So where do you set the dial, right? It's kind of the obvious thing. You missed all the good stuff. All right, just kidding. The good stuff's coming. All right, so this has happened before. Obviously, with the printing press, we lost something. No more illuminated manuscripts, but knowledge is widely available. With calculators, people weren't able to compute in kind of the same way. But with computer, scientists could do lots of things they couldn't do prior to that. And so I think, again, we should mindfully think about how we're going to move into this and find kind of the right, again, knob setting for how to regulate ourselves, what are appropriate norms and practices. And I think a good way to do this is just to kind of anchor our reasoning in relatively clear cases. So, example, I'll start with the bad examples that are maybe easier. I just heard somebody use the word cheat GPT. All right, so when I've obviously been dealing with this, right? I'll have a Canvas quiz, and then I'll try the quiz myself on ChatGPT. At first, it was getting 50%. Eventually, it's getting 100%. That's not learning, right? Going into a class and copy pasting from GPT into the quiz, I think is obviously, that's a problem. It's a clear issue. We need to develop some workaround. There obviously are workarounds. We've gone back to paper and pencil tests. This is harder with written assignments, but I just read this thing. What is it? It's in there in the notes. The multi-day in-class lockdown browser essay assignment. And so, this is the kind of conversation we should be having, right? Figuring out what is the right balance. I don't think all the examples are bad, right? So, I certainly get a lot out of ChatGPT. I use it as a kind of bespoke e-tutor, right? I could have long conversations. It's gotten much better. If I want to learn about some area that I don't know much about, I could sort of talk with it indefinitely. It doesn't get tired. It listens. I had a nice conversation the other day about this and applications. This sort of, like, there's no person I could go to that wouldn't get completely tired of me asking, but I could hammer a GPT all night with questions, and I learn from it, right? And it takes care of different kinds of mundane tasks, and it could indeed contribute to these kind of human-machine hybrids, contribute to scientific discovery. This is already starting to happen. So somewhere in the middle, that's my take. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Next, we'll have Professor Bongers from Applied Math and the Data Science and Computing program. And actually turn
Just muted
this stuff off.
Okay, I think Hannah.
Okay.
Great. Great. Well, so thank you for that. I really appreciated it, and it's a nice overview of how these models work. I also really appreciated. It reminds me of CSI when they're trying to match the fingerprints, and they have the rapid showing all the fingerprints at once. So there's a lot of things I want to follow up on from what Jeff was talking about in terms of information and education and its role in our society. So one of the things that has a very, very long historical arc in society around the world has been a trend towards democratization of information. Information now is so much more available than it was when I was a child, and that in turn is so much more than 20 years before that or 20 years before that. I can now pick up my phone, dial something on WhatsApp and talk to someone 10,000 miles away. I can go to ChatGPT and look up pretty much any fact that I want. I can go to Google and get an AI summary of a question that I have. And historically, this has been going on for hundreds of years. So a classical example that comes to mind is during the Protestant Reformation, when the Bible was translated from Latin into many, many local languages. And so you had a spreading of information and a dilution of hierarchy as people became more and more exposed to information that they were being taught. We had communication rapidly improve in terms of speed and throughput and processing. You know, we had the telegraph 150 years ago, leading to the telephone and then ultimately the internet. And when we get to the early internet, a lot of it was very, very deeply ideological in terms of how it was being built. The free and open source software movement is founded on principles of democratizing not just information, but the means to process information, even down to the very hardware that computers are built upon. Then you start getting things like Wikipedia. So when I was in college, a lot of professors would say things like, you can never cite Wikipedia as a source for an essay, because in the early days it was frequently unreliable, it's secondhand information. But then sort of the more progressive professors would say, well, you can use it, but use it as a bibliography, a place to then go and look for other sources. And this is sort of reminding me of how ChatGPT can be used now, or within the last couple of years, because ChatGPT started off being very, very unreliable, and now in some areas is extremely reliable, although in many other areas it is very deeply not. So throughout all of this, though, there's a tension between democratizing information and maintaining some sort of consistency, or keeping things informative and accurate. So as I use large language models, or as I Google things and get the AI summary, I'll pretty often notice that there's something just completely wrong in it. Like it's the hallucinations, as you mentioned, where you can classify the two. But this will also extend to cases where it'll just do arithmetic wrong. It'll make up a paper, it'll make up a citation, it'll contradict itself. So there's a huge opportunity for misinformation. And of course, living in the political environment that we are in now, where misinformation can be both intentional and unintentional, can be based on state actors and non-state actors, and can really permeate the information ecosystem, it's very, very challenging to know what to trust. One of the special challenges that comes up when you're working with AI and large language models, especially things that are based on neural networks, it is very frequently not at all transparent how the neural network is making the decisions that it's making. If I was trying to teach an alien what the number 9 looks like, I would say, well, it's a round piece that has a straight piece attached to it. But a neural network is not going to be able to do that. It's looking at individual pixels, it's looking for trends. It's not able to give any sort of qualitative description of what is a 9 versus what is an 8 versus any other number. And so you end up with these challenges where a neural network or an AI might be telling you something very, very authoritatively with an air of confidence, and yet it can't explain it and frequently just ends up making things up. So I think that's where we really start running into a lot of the issues where this intersects with education. Many of the ethical issues that arise in AI have been run into before in the days of the early internet, in the days of Wikipedia, throughout history. There are many, many new things with AI, especially given how rapidly it is impacting the economy. But many of the issues about information provenance, reliability, and the general usage are things that people have been thinking about for a very, very long time. So that sort of brings me to where I see a role for education. So I teach primarily math courses, but I also teach data science courses. So things involving, software writing, coding, programming. and data analysis. And there's not just one aspect that I end up teaching. Sometimes I'm teaching technical skills. Like, in order to write a computer program, you need to know how to write it. You need to know what it means when you write a for loop. You need to know how to run a compiler. So there are skills that we need to know. In mathematics, we need to know how to do calculus, or we need to know how to do algebra, depending on what exactly we're doing. But the thing is that most students don't end up using those skills day to day, or even all that often. Like, I'm going to make a guess that most people 20 years after they take calculus don't remember the quotient rule, or one of these algorithms that we teach. And I think that's okay, because that's not necessarily the point. There is this technical skill that we need, but there's also the reasoning. There's the algorithmic fluency. There's the abstraction and the pattern recognition. There's this need to recognize how to build and analyze a logical argument. How you can see that if I change this factor, this thing responds in a particular way, which feeds forward into this thing, which feeds forward into this thing, and does the thing I want or not want. And that's what humans are really, really good at frequently, and a lot of AI is not. There are many, many AIs that are able now to start building in some sort of reasoning. Or especially with the rise of transformers recently, there's a lot of ways that you can sort of figure out why it's making some of the deductions that it's making, but it is really stripping out a lot of the humanity of it and the sort of long-term analysis of how all the impacts tie together. It can take a very, very local view based largely on its training data, but it cannot recognize the larger impacts and the context that it is working within. And I think this is very related to another tension in education. We have this balance between technical skills and what I'm going to call broadly citizenship. Citizenship in a global society, where we can understand the impacts of our actions, we understand information and how it's transmitted, we have an idea of ethics and culture, we have exposure to ideas that are not just about economic productivity. AI is very good at some things that have to do with economic productivity, but not with thinking about society. So I think this is, again, a fundamental tension between these two different ideas. How do we incorporate, being a good citizen, being a good community member, and compare that to how do we get things done and make money? So with all this in mind, I want to talk about a couple of particular ways that AI can be incorporated into education and how these are good things and bad things. So again, sort of trying to take a nuanced view on it. So one thing is with chatbots, or chatbot tutors in particular, as you mentioned. So just out of curiosity, how many people have used either ChatGPT or something else as like a tutor in their class? They've asked it. Okay, so most people have done this. This can be a really, really helpful thing because, as you pointed out, if you have a question about your chemistry at 2 a.m, you're probably not going to be able to get very much help. On the other hand, there's the challenge of where did that information come from? How was it trained? How reliable is it? These are very, very difficult things, especially for something that we're in the process of learning. Because if you're in the process of learning a field, it's very, very difficult to identify misinformation or mistakes. Another frequent usage is for essays or email writing. How many people have used ChatGPT to write an email or a letter or something like that? Quite a few people. I actually I briefly considered starting this with I hope this panel finds you well or something. That's a dead giveaway. And, I think that this is also a really thorny thing because it can automate routine tasks that are not necessarily the most effective uses of our time, although at the same time it takes a lot of the humanity out of interactions that we have. We also have issues with the sourcing of the data. So there are many free resources on the internet that you can train a chatbot on. You know, much of Wikipedia, for example, is licensed under fairly loose licensing to allow for educational use, data mining, etc. But then there's a huge amount of copyrighted material or personal material or private things or stolen material that gets used to train these things. And so what does that say about us if we use this tool based on stolen ideas that then creates its new ideas? It's, again, a complicated thing. And then one final thing I'll just mention is that AI requires monitoring, because we need to have some sort of expertise to be able to go in and tell, is it actually doing well? Is it giving good answers? Is it just making things up? So humans tend not to be great at monitoring automation or monitoring technical systems. So this is not completely directly related to AI, but historically there are many cases of people being tasked with monitoring an automated system that they don't understand, leading to consequences. So two things I'll mention as particular cases. One is the Chernobyl nuclear accident, which largely came from not understanding certain kinds of automation and systems. And another is in aircraft. So Airbus planes, for example, are very frequently heavily automated in a way that Boeing planes are not. This has led to a number of crashes and has killed quite a few people because of this tension between the humans and the computer trying to automate something that the humans don't understand, or vice versa. So just to sort of wrap up, I'm, reading between the lines, it's probably easy to guess some of my views on large language models and their usage. But I do think that there are a lot of tensions at play here between productivity and creativity, between citizenship in a global community and just being able to crank out technical skills, and then between democracy of information and having correctness of information, and between hierarchies and freedom. And so I think that there are some very deeply challenging issues here about using AI and using it well. So I'll stop there.
And third, we will hear from Professor Hanna Gunn from philosophy. Oh, do you want
It looks like this. It's a disaster, and I'll show it.
Do you want slides?
I can put them if I can.
Okay.
I don't need any. But Jeffrey's pictures. Okay. Kia ora koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to a hostile takeover of higher education by Big Tech. Okay, please bear with me. I'm going to try to be a little provocative like that, but I do have a migraine, and so I have to read, and this is not what I generally do. I don't think the pictures are going to work, so you'll just have to listen to me, I guess. It's fine, I don't need them. I didn't write this with them in mind. They would be emphatic footnotes to the kinds of things I'm going to say. Okay, so the first thing I want to put up here is just an injunction to remember that you are not the user. You are not the average user of computers, you are not the average user of the internet, and you are not the average user of LLMs. The slide that I want to put up there for you is some research from the OECD skills study looking at adults' abilities across the OECD, every from age 16 to age 65, and their ability to use computers. And it would show you that 30% of that population can't even use a mouse. it would show you that only 5% of that population is capable of looking for all of the emails sent by a particular person on a specific topic from a particular month. We are not the average users of these technologies, and we really have to remember that, because our choices shape the direction of this technology for the rest of the society, whether they want it or not. And actually, to pick up on one of the points that Rose was just making, it's not actually just about our society. These are global technologies run by American companies that organize the internet, a global technology. The choices we are making for the world, not for ourselves and not for our campus. That's my prelude. So really, it's Should you reach that? Thank you. I will fall over if I try to pin down. Okay. All right. A lot of people feel like the current LLM tools are something new on the block. At some point, however, we're going to have to call out the techno-optimists for promising us the world and delivering us yet another way to make a phone call, send a letter, or type something out faster for free for a while. The next step after telecommunications technologies become yet another vehicle for charging us users rents is, of course, to look for other kinds of contracts. If LLMs follow the same track as other recent Internet of Things technologies, we can expect a much closer relationship between those companies and policing and governments. Like home smart speakers and digital assistants like Siri have, and in much the same way as texting, phone calls, and your internet service provider all created backdoors for these kinds of surveillance. You might want to look into the history of net neutrality if you don't know what that means. Now, all the libraries are online, and we still don't have democratized access to knowledge and research, but we do have new paywalls and subscriptions and new centers of private power controlling access to that information that public institutions can pay to access. Ebooks have come on the scene, and so have iPads and Chromebooks, so the physical books can be digital files. They are not exactly free and certainly not open access, but they are sometimes cheaper than the physical books. And let's all just assume Amazon pulling 1984 off of everyone's Kindles that they had purchased was a one-off. And let's also not think too hard about whether the materials making up the computer are better for the environment than the ink on tree pulp that can be recycled but it has displaced. I suppose educational inequality wasn't quite solved by digitizing the textbooks, homework packets, and video lectures. MOOCs, or massively open online courses, did happen, sort of. And they didn't quite solve it either, because the desire for online learning wasn't quite what some thought it would be. New digital formats didn't in fact transform the student diet for putting in the work of reading, homework, and writing, and they didn't make professors into new creatures exactly either. But LLMs might be different. Well, we haven't made much substantive progress on how to engage in content moderation on the internet, and I would know, I run an industry academia partnership group on this. We're talking with people from Meta, from Discord, from Reddit, from TikTok. They are lost. Or much substantive progress on how to teach people to find high quality information online rather than slop, conspiracy theories, and other bunk. And while it remains unclear at this point in time how we can deal with the sheer deluge of synthetic content polluting research databases and search engines, it might be that LLMs will turn all of these tides. They've not been around for even 5 years at this point, and really, see, I put 1.5, but I guess Dan said 2.5, so pick an average. Really, only 1.5 years as usable technologies, so maybe they will be different. While other AI technologies like big data models seem to have shown us that our pre-existing prejudicial biases are easily embedded into the decision-making processes, and that adding them to workflows often increases caseloads to the point where human decision-making is simply a burden quickly done away with. It's possible that LLMs will end up with a way around that too, but call me skeptical. LLMs arrived before we made much progress with any of these problems facing big data. I do, at this point, need to let you know that I don't oppose new technologies. There's a picture for this. It's a zero pressure high altitude balloon and a World War II era high altitude balloon with a rocket strapped to the bottom and another similar image. While I'm a philosophy professor now, and while you shouldn't assume that being a philosophy professor means that I'm useless with or resistant to technology, first Apple computer, usually run Linux, It was not that long ago that I was the vice president of my own undergraduate university's Aerospace Club and 3D Printing Club, RepRap, Mendel Max, Model 2 generation early adopters. I can do surface mount soldering, boil and prepare World War II era high altitude balloons, just imagine it looks like a giant onion, and put together a Yagi antenna. I have pins from the Google Loon engineers, zero pressure balloon, if you know what that looks like, that have been high enough in our own atmosphere by zero pressure to see the curvature of the Earth and the blackness of the void of space. I was a card-carrying member of evidence-based medicine and technocrat policy groups, what was once called scientific skepticism, but it's hard to use the word skeptic these days outside of philosophical circles without one's audience thinking that it means anti-science or anti-intellectual. Scientific skeptics are the kind of people who will fact-check you mid-sentence to let you know that there's actually no scientific evidence supporting things like sorry, I learned about these on Monday. Sort of. Putting cod liver oil in your belly button overnight? Or dunking your face in expensive bottles of sparkling water in the morning? TikTokers. I have entered the world of your get ready with me routines and I am unimpressed. It's all advertising. It is all advertising. Okay, anyway, separate point. I was a post-humanist or transhumanist. I chaired on the projects for a fully automated leisure society and some version of the quantified self movement. I wanted one of those neodymium magnets the size of a grain of rice installed on my finger so I could feel electrical magnetic currents. I stand here today disappointed, and I want to invite you to be disappointed too. I want you to feel that you have agency and power over the direction of your own education, careers, and lives. And I want you to recognize that at this moment, none of us are at the table making decisions about whether we want this technology, whether we want it now, and whether we want to prioritize these LLMs as they presently exist over the other ways we might improve our experience of education of the lives we will lead after our time on this campus. We need to remember how to be skeptical in the face of technology. We need to ask for evidence first, as good researchers do, before we abandon the old course. One subject that I teach is value theory. Value theory is about how we find meaning and purpose in our lives. We consider the essays of philosophers who have taken a stance and challenged mainstream answers to those questions. The debate about the aims of education for a society is a value theory project. It requires that we ask the question, what is the role of education in a liberal democratic society like ours? What is its purpose in securing our flourishing? Education in liberal democracies is generally justified by two things. First, that it enables one to become intellectually autonomous, and second, that it should support our commitment to a society of moral pluralism. A long-standing concern in value theory debates about education has been the shift towards vocational or careers training, and away from all of the other values and purposes that education can serve. A career doesn't prepare one for all aspects of life. Sorry, I should have looked away. A career doesn't prepare one for all the aspects of a human life, just the bit that pays the bills. But an education can provide one with far more than just a job. It shapes our beliefs, desires, more broadly our worldview. We meet new people, ideas, and perspectives on the good life. We can learn how to disagree without shouting. We might find love and friends and experience joy in learning with one another. Remember the pandemic, and remember how isolating and education in front of a computer can be. Is this the future we should desire? And if not, how can we prevent it? Intellectual autonomy requires us to balance a disposition for humility with one for skepticism. Humility involves knowing your own limitations, but also recognizing your strengths, be these skills or content knowledge. The humble person is not arrogant, but is also not gullible or deferential. The skeptic refuses to form beliefs in the absence of compelling evidence. If our goal is to answer the question, what is the role of education in society, and what is the role of people and LLMs in it, then we should do our best to avoid prejudging the case. And importantly, because as I already mentioned, these tools are so new. Nobody is in the evidential position right now to say that these are as good or better than the evidence-based teaching and learning practices we've been using up to this point. We don't have the evidence yet to know how they can or cannot foster intellectual autonomy and independence, and we have good reasons to be worried that they in fact make us dependent on the choices of the companies that own and provide the technologies to us. I recognize that some educational users of these tools may be great, but humility also requires that early adopters recognize that this is what they are, early adopters. There are good reasons for teachers, students, and their families to want to resist untested, highly evolving technologies in their classrooms, and particularly when we have a good sense of the risks of creating this new pool of user data and information controlled by only a handful of big tech companies their relationship to governments, you can think through yourself. I'm worried about the way that LLMs incentivize panoptic surveillance and a culture of distrust. The advice directed at me about controlling the use of LLMs in my classrooms makes me into a tool of surveillance. Lockdown browsers, eye tracking software, version control, and user analytics. This isn't the kind of trusting, caring teacher-student relationship that bell hooks inspired me to pursue and compellingly argued was required for effective student learning. It isn't the kind of student-teacher relationship that strikes me as symptomatic of a well-functioning liberal democratic education. I do have concerns that the kind of integration of LLMs into higher education that we are seeing will fail to help us develop our own intellectual autonomy and independence. I worry that talking to chatbots is not a replacement for engaging in debates with real people with whom one disagrees, but that enabled me in my own life the radical autonomy to explore what living a different kind of life might look like. I worry that we are overly differential to what the computer says, and that we will trust AI like we came to trust Googling more than each other. I worry that while we might resist talking only to computers at first, we already have plenty of reasons around us to take seriously the idea that we might feel safer with e-friends. I worry that existing work on online political homophily suggests we would rather avoid engaging with other members of our society with whom we disagree, and that LLMs will enable us to engage with strawman versions of them, causing us to be more alienated from one another. I have great concerns that LLMs will take financial resources and attention away from other solutions to the social and political problems facing education and facing us in our lives while we try to work out how to flourish with them. I hear my students worry that they will get an LLM before tutors and professors and before they get a campus newspaper or other facilities. I see campuses around the country closing departments and signing contracts with OpenAI. In technology ethics, we practice analysing how new technologies and technology policies enhance our autonomy. But we also look at the ways that making certain choices shuts out other options and removes them from other people, undermining their autonomy. We discuss how to balance autonomy against and with the values of justice and well-being. Sometimes we talk about something called the experience machine, a virtual reality simulator that could give you the perfect virtual life. I'm yet to have a class that endorses the experience machine. They keep telling me that they agree with Nozick, that they, quote, want to do certain things and not just to have the virtual experience of doing them, that they want to be a certain way and to be a certain sort of person. However these technologies develop, we should make sure that they enable our students to become the people that they want to be. Maybe that will be a job, but I hope we prepare them for the rest too.
Questions, comments, or your thoughts? Up front.
Okay, where to start? So the point regarding the opacity of how language models produce their answers is certainly well taken. But how can we be so sure that human knowledge is so transparent by comparison? Sure, a 9 might be a round piece with a tail, but aren't there details of how you recognize it not covered by that description? In fact, I asked ChatGPT how it would recognize a 9, and it gave essentially the same answer. What if, like LLMs, we also confabulate ex post facto stories about how we know things when the truth might not be totally transparent to us? For example, we might think that our political beliefs are totally rationally constructed, and we may have rational reasons we can point to for them, and yet there may be objectively unconscious personal or emotional factors that might be just as influential, if not more so.
Yeah, I can say it. Yeah, I completely agree with you that there are fundamental problems with this idea of like how we approach knowledge and information. So yes, the information that we come up with is very, very frequently filtered through centuries of academia, educational systems. Those systems in turn are influenced by colonialism, by capitalism, by all of the different things that have shaped our society, good and bad. But one of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is the lack of transparency coupled with the concentration of power into very, very few hands. That there are a few very, very large tech companies, including OpenAI and Meta and Alphabet or Google, that have such a huge societal impact while also being completely non-transparent about where the data comes from, how it's being used, and how it's being processed and presented to the user.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a short answer. I'm happy to expand on.
Oh, that's a good answer. Yeah.
Aspect of it. I'll also mention that we always need to be skeptical about the filters that knowledge comes to us through. If you're sitting in a college class, you can see that the information that is coming from your professor is shaped by their experience, their education, their ideology, etc. Whereas when it's coming through ChatGPT or Google AI, etc., the core motivation in a capitalist society is to gather more capital and to make more money. There's not an altruistic idea of presenting more information and making it freely available. These things happen because someone can profit from them.
I would add on to that a little bit. Both morally and legally, we require people to be able to explain and be accountable for their actions. Yes, sometimes people might make something up, but they're on the hook for that as well. One of the things that's really different with these kind of technologies is they're created in such a way that it leads to what we call the many hands problem, right? You've got like the person who put the training set together, you've got the CEO who asked for it, you've got the person who's selling it to a business, you've got the business experience. There are a lot of people involved in the decision-making pipeline. And we have no way right now to hold those people accountable. There are so many hands, we can't hold anyone responsible. Now, the cynical view on this is that that is intentional. If you're setting up a large and complicated business, it's definitely in your interest if you think you might be subject to litigation to make sure that it's very difficult to hold people responsible.
Sure. Yeah.
So even if you can't say why you did what you did, we will hold you responsible for what you did.
Mhm.
In this case, we don't know who to hold responsible, and they're going to tell us they can't give an explanation. So so it comes back to sort of how there's ways for these companies to dodge responsibility for the impacts they have on the world, but no person can have even if they did the same thing.
Yeah, that's good. That's fair. Yeah.
I saw over there first, and then we'll go to you.
So I'm noticing the general theme talking about concentration of power and lack of transparency, and then also the profit motivation of this being run by private capitalistic corporations. And also, I've been thinking a lot about the fact that for these systems to actually be able to like democratize information, there needs to be like policy oversight, right? And I'm not sure there's much trust in our current system of government to like implement those kind of policies, especially because, as you guys have stated, it has a global impact. So I'm curious as to again, let me restate it. With a system like this, where you don't actually know what the decision-making process is going on inside of the system, a good example would be like DeepSeek. There's certain things which it's not even talked about because of the kind of training that it's undergone and like the kind of like the training that's been implemented by the makers of it. And particularly for something like ChatGPT, I'm worried about kind of like, I think you mentioned it, like the filters that are put on the information and how it can kind of homogenize information and take out dissenting voices, critical voices, and homogenize a large pool of knowledge into something that only really upholds the status quo and upholds the dominant narratives. And it kind of makes it difficult for other critical narratives to be seen and heard and like make it into the mainstream. So that's my kind of concern, is the homogenization of narrative and information. And I think that that's kind of like, it's in conflict with like the democratization of information, because on the one hand, yes, you can talk to the bot and you can get all sorts of knowledge that you've never heard before, but at the same time, that knowledge is being filtered for filters that you don't know what they are. And it's maybe not taking in or espousing views that might be critical or might be like, for example, anti-capitalist or stuff like that. So I'm curious as what you guys think could be done to kind of counteract that. I know that was kind of all over the place, but
Well, I guess one thought that comes to mind is that I think in a capitalist society, all technologies will be used for a profit motive. It's for the water we're swimming in. But that we could do something similar to what's been done in other cases. So open sourcing it, cracking open the box. I mean, certainly you could run little instances of these large language models and train your own. I think we should encourage that. I think Wikipedia is a good thing. I think Reddit's a good thing. These are democratizing processes relative to technologies that also have malicious usages. So again, this is sort of a piecemeal, adjust the knobs as we go. I mean, I think the cat's out of the bag. I think they're here. We're swimming in AI too now, for better or worse. And so we should be building those. But comes with dangers, right? Once you take all the filters off, how do I make a nano weapon or whatever? How do I kill this guy next to, whatever? I mean, that. So I think we should democratize the process itself.
So I just gave a keynote called The World Wide Web was Splinternet. And so I think if we were really serious about wanting democratic technology and democratic knowledge and democratic internet, we wouldn't have one. We would have lots. And they might actually be fundamentally different internets. My proposal would include maybe, you want commerce net? Great, run on blockchain. Right, make the Web 2.0. You want Wikipedia? You really don't need Web 2.0. For me, I think that's available on that. We could have computers that are able to open and modify or replace the batteries in, rather than having this sort of rent relationship with corporations that make technology that's functional that we tell us we need and tell us we want to use, but don't actually let us design, control, build those systems ourselves. So I actually think we have to push much further than thinking a democratic internet is a place where some users get to vote on moderation decisions. That's not far enough. The same way that we don't have a democratic society when we don't have democratic controlled institutions. We have a sort of democratic voting bit. That's it. Right? I mean, do you decide what your course is going to be on? Do you make decisions about your side? In my class, you might get to do some of these things, right? But lots of students don't like those things. They haven't been in a position of being a mutual decision maker at the table with everybody else. Because participating in democratic processes requires training, capacities, knowledge, and involvement that we're not prepared for. So I think we should be pushing really radical visions out there about what would a truly democratic internet look like? Would it be one thing? Would it be multiple internets? Would they be tethered to nation states? Would they be tethered to functional users? Would they be tethered to interests? There's a lot of things that we could do. The Google loan thing, zero pressure balloons, was what Google was doing to provide universal internet coverage 10 years ago. And they couldn't do it because of the control that the major telecoms companies had. They wouldn't let Google create Google Live. Now, there's good reasons that they didn't do that. We don't need Google also doing what Starlink is now trying to do and provide the world's internet, because that's one person. That's not democratic control. Even if you get to vote on how many bits there are, how many balloons there are, right? That's not real accountability. So I would say I share a lot of your concerns here. I really think we need to sort of go back to reading sort of radical, meaningful, substantive democratic theory and think about if that's what we want, a truly democratic society with democratic technology, you need it all the way down. You can't just have like a side door that lets you vote sometimes and whether I'll picture a civil or not. That's not democracy.
Completely agree with that. One thing that I'd like to sort of add just about the practicalities of democratizing these things. I think that LLMs are among the first technical things that are really, really difficult for typical users to be able to interact with at a high level, such as training your own AI. These things take massive amounts of computing resources, they take massive amounts of raw materials just to build the graphics cards that go into training things. Very frequently, data centers that these corporations have are built near hydroelectric power plants or wind turbines or places where electricity is cheap just because they are so absolutely massive in terms of the requirements for infrastructure. And I'll just contrast that with Wikipedia, which, as you mentioned, in Web 2.0. you can download Wikipedia. Like, you can just go to, you can go to Wikipedia, click download, and it's something, or last time I did this, it was like 32 gigabytes. That was a few years ago, so I'm guessing it's quite a bit more. But as long as you're downloading without like all the media and all the pictures, this is something you can fit onto a flash drive. This is something that you can democratize. And so I think we need to build this ethical thinking and this liberal democratic thinking about how we structure the distribution of power. We need to have that built in from the ground up in terms of how these things are envisioned and regulated and distributed.
I have one point on that, but we should also remember that it's an international global technology and not every country is limited to it. And so just exporting our system out is another way potentially of colonizing the tech future. So I also think we need to bear
And so many of these things are built on American infrastructure with American information, with American regulation by companies that make American dollars and have power over the American government through lobbying.
So we'll go to you at the end, and then you over here.
So I agree with the statement that the implementation of AI can definitely be kind of undemocratic. But would you guys agree with the following assertion that without using LMs such as ChatGPT, that students or workers are going to get left behind in the dust? Like, in other words, if we don't utilize this technology, we are going to be left in the dust in terms of competition, in terms of learning material in class. So I would really just love to learn your perspective on it.
I don't think so. That's probably unsurprising. Yeah, there might be some sectors where you need to be using advanced generative AI to do your work, but there's a lot of farmers, there's a lot of early childhood teachers, there's a lot of primary school teachers, there are truck drivers, there's a lot of fisher people, there's a lot of careers that don't use this. In fact, most people finish high school and never write anything again. It's the idea that suddenly everybody in the world needs highly advanced language processing AI is a little bit of a mystery to me. Because it's just not true. A lot of people don't have computers, don't use them. The introduction of LLMs isn't suddenly going to change the nature of their work. And they may not want that work either. Right? We have to remember that we're at a university. You came to a university map to come to a university talk. And this room isn't even full. Right? So we have to remember not to project our own desires, values, and goals into other people. And so, yeah, so I'm not sure. Maybe some sectors. Doesn't seem like all of them. And I don't use GPT. In fact, when Apple forcibly installed it on this, which I've had for about 6 hours, last semester I got a fully manual typewriter. Right? So, like, I don't need it. I don't want to use it. And I really resent the way that it sort of worked its way into that LLM such that my students can have this constant suspicion that I'm not grading their work. It's just the LLM, right? So, no, right? It's not, yeah. So I think a vision of the future from some people who want a particular kind of advanced tech society might suggest that all work is going to become automated white collar work. Wait, if we automated white collar work, we don't need to be university either. So what work is going to be automated? Actually, it's the stuff that the AI does. It's only what we're all going to have. So yeah, I really have a lot of qualms about this idea.
I also don't know the answer, but I mean, I agree with Hanna that we should be intellectually humble about this and not assume it's just this wonderful thing that's gonna fix everything, right? Or that we have to do it to stay ahead of the competition. But I think intellectual humility requires also, do I know that it shouldn't be allowed, right? Should I, I completely respect your autonomy as an epistemic agent, but should I tell everybody, you must use a typewriter, right? And you must not use this. This is wrong to you. I mean, but I mean that the attitude there of you're just turning into the idiocracy guy, watching out my balls or whatever, like that. It has transformed how I think about things, and the kinds of things I could do and create. It really has, especially as the models have gotten better. And so I just don't know. I think these dangers that we're talking about are real. I'm not just a complete techno-optimist, but I'm not a complete techno-pessimist either. You know, I think we need to be comfortable in these gray areas. So yeah, again, it's the short and motion.
So, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'll just be quick. But I actually agree with Hannah that I don't think that this is going to put people at a systematic disadvantage. In large part because we have a lot of evidence going back historically of people going through education, achieving great things without using any of these models. I think that LLMs can accelerate certain kinds of work, and they can get rid of very, very routine work. You know, I'm thinking back to the Industrial Revolution when you have factories that can produce clothes far faster than a human can. There's benefits and drawbacks to that because, you know, people who can use a machine all of a sudden don't have a job. But that being said, I think that LLMs really, really struggle with creative work, with originality, with deep analysis that goes beyond a very, very surface level reading of a text. And I think that heavy usage of LLMs actually leads to a negative impact on skills because it's very, very easy to just sit back and watch something and to not learn how to do it yourself. Like, I watch a lot of cooking videos on YouTube, and that doesn't make me a good cook until I go in the kitchen and mess things up a few times. And I think that LLMs used badly take away that learning experience and do not have a net increase of technical skills and technical education.
Okay, so we're gonna go to you, and then I'm gonna do hands again.
So I just wanted to ask about what your guys' opinions are on the ethical impact around social interaction, especially with AI, as a lot of people are starting to turn to AI to have conversations for emotional support, especially with different AI actually being utilized as therapists and integrated as teachers and supplementary, just to provide that kind of emotional support towards people, and how that may affect our own mental health and the way that we approach social interaction in general. Are we going to start to prefer talking to AI versus other people because it's not as judgmental, because it's more of just a reflection of what we want it to say? So yeah.
I mean, we don't know, right? I mean, this has to be a thing. So, Jeff's right to say, well, you don't know that the economy's not going to go that way. Yeah, I don't. But it's also premature to have all of the major governments in the world put the bulk of their funding into a bucket. I don't know, right? So what we do know is that we generally, for the last 10 years, as the rise of streaming and VTubers and influencers have come about and increased, that we don't think very highly of parasocial relationships. I've tried to look into the psychological research around parasocial relationships with influencers, right? So if you watch an influencer, they don't know who you are, I'm sorry. You're just another number in their analytics report. They don't know you. It doesn't matter when they say, hi friend. When they start the video, they don't know you. So, we don't know what the long-term impacts of parasocial relationships are. We're generally somewhat adverse to them. I think a lot of parents are very concerned that their kids their only friends might be through character AI. We do have some instances now of some teenagers taking their own lives because their character AI friends told them to. And so I'm not sure. I can tell you that in the philosophy of love and in the philosophy of friendship, a core value across different areas of love and friendship is that it has to be a reciprocal relationship of understanding. And for the technical reasons underlying the systems, we don't have good reason to think they do this. I'm not particularly impressed by how convincing they are. Eliza was very convincing. It's a 1960s chatbot psychotherapist. Eliza passed the Turing test. People see ghosts in class. People see Bigfoot in photographs. People see fairies. And tech tricking people isn't known. Can it trick them in a way that can help with their actual well-being? I don't know. But a short story to read on this theme would be The Machine Stops.
I'm going to disagree factually on Eliza. I don't think it's past its right test. It's really terrible.
Running in the lab, people come in and have a chat.
I mean, there were instances of people having brief chats and being convinced, but you know, any serious Turing test. In fact, it was recently used as a control.
I do it in my class, but Eliza doesn't get
We
it.
do it
The
too,
older
yeah.
one does.
Oh, we hammer it pretty hard. I mean, again, I'm just gonna get, it's the same basic answer. It sounds very scary to me, you know, it's like if my kids were just, their only friends were AI, you know, but I mean, Dungeons and Dragons, you know, it's like you're gonna, you know, satanic kill yourself or something. And I mean, there is something to when you're undergoing something traumatic, to be able to really unload onto something that has no apparent judgment of you at your will as long as you want. I don't think that's nothing. So I'm not willing to foreclose it altogether either. I just, you know.
I think I'll go back to some things that I was mentioning earlier, just about like what the motivations are behind some of these systems. Like one of the things that has really, in my view, hurt American society in particular over the last few years has been the fact that strong emotions lead to more engagement than weak emotions. In particular, anger drives clicks. Like, I know that I will sometimes hate click a link on Reddit because, like, I want to go and like be mean in my head to somebody that I really disagree with. This is not necessarily a good trait, but I think it's a pretty common one. And so you can look back at like Cambridge Analytica in about 2016 and the impact that that had on the 2016 election, largely because companies are able to exploit our deepest feelings and our deep emotions to drive engagement. And I'm very, very deeply concerned that there's a huge conflict of interest underlying these ideas. I also am concerned that I think being able to hear someone out without judgment can be very, very helpful, but it also separates it from humanity. Like, it separates us from our culture and our history and our ideas of, you know, things that are right or wrong. And I think that that can amplify negative emotions, negative traits, and can be harmful. It can also be helpful to give advice, but you know, ChatGPT is never going to be able to do much more than very general, broad advice that you could probably find on Wikipedia or Google.
Yes. Wow. Okay.
It's fine.
We'll go with Cosmo, and then the back. You had your hand up before, and in the maps. And then we'll see where we are by the time.
Okay, so one of my things that I think is a concern with AI, and especially as more centers are built, is like the environmental impacts of this technology and how, like, as we kind of, you know, like you talked about the materials required to make the kind of like graphics cards and all the computer parts that go into, you know, sustaining these machines, but also like the large energy requirements, or I've heard of places that use like water cooling and stuff like that. So there's like a lot of resources kind of being pulled to this. And I could see as maybe if corporations are building more and more of these kind of data centers for AIs, that more and more of the resources are kind of going to be pooled into this. And so I'm kind of wondering your guys' kind of thoughts on like how we can kind of, if there's a way to kind of mitigate these environmental impacts while still kind of pushing the technology, or if it's kind of going to be one of these things where, you know, I guess it starts becoming like another kind of like fossil fuels situation where we've kind of ingrained ourselves into this system that is harming our planet. And yeah, that's kind of the general gist of my question.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I think that's an extremely important consideration, and in my mind, the strongest argument against it. And the way I'm thinking of it, like in a lot of these things with climate change, for example, I'm interested in visualization. I think we need clear, concrete ways to think about these things. I kind of feel like somebody needs to develop a unit
that is accessible to us to think about. I mean, like units of like how many Netflix movies is it to chat for 2 hours? You know, I'm not sure the answer. But you know, if you're doing 4K streaming video or watching movies every night or leaving the Netflix on, I mean, it's pretty big environmental cost too. That's more than Wikipedia, right? That's like just a lot of data running over the wire. I think this should just be built. So I think we should sort of work backwards from this environmental concern to the broader environmental concerns with all the media that we're consuming. I think it should just be part of I think there should be more deliberation about this, and I think it should be just as much as possible, through as much public pressure as possible, constraint on the development of these technologies. I think there's been advances, you know, even light-based, low inference costs. Training is always going to be expensive. I think DeepSeek has this mixture of experts system where, you know, only a small subset of the parts of the network are used. I mean, our brains are obviously very energy efficient, so a silicon brain should be able to be relatively energy efficient. I think we should be pushing for that.
There was, these things are controversial. There was a lab out of UC Merced that did give a unit, and they were looking at GPT-3, and it was every query is a 500 ml bottle of water, which is a 12-ounce water bottle. So every query is that much water consumed. We're well past that version now, so I don't know what they would update it to, and everybody who puts an estimate like this out gets a lot of controversy. If we're going to have it, we have to find a way to do this. What the tech companies are starting to move in the direction of is building their own nuclear power plants. Those will not be state-owned. So yeah, we have to be paying attention to this. Whatever your feelings were about nuclear and anti-nuclear debates 20 years ago, you have to re-update. So like all of us need to learn more about the current systems and whether or not they're feasible. But there are a lot of people who are really skeptical and have always been skeptical of the promises of nuclear power against the risks. And that people would rather go that way than truly invest in sustainable or renewable resources. I would like to echo Jeff's point here about the streaming. I mean, it is hugely expensive. The streaming, so the fact that we don't talk about how much it's invisible, completely invisible to us, right? How much our use of the internet costs. Although it's not fully invisible because we're in California and we're experiencing wildfires. So like, it's coming to us, just not in our pockets, which is the only thing the system seems to be responsible to. So yeah, I don't know. If we have to have it, demand that it be sustainable. Refuse to use it otherwise.
I agree. We've been through this before with Bitcoin. Lots of people build Bitcoin mining centers and use this. Yeah.
I remember affordable graphics cards.
So do I, and now graphics cards are used by LLMs. There's a reason NVIDIA is one of the highest market cap companies in the world. But yeah, these are fundamental problems, and you're completely right that all of the things that we do online have a surprisingly large impact, especially with things like streaming video. You can get away with some of these things by localizing data centers, by having broader distribution of media. This sort of goes also with the whole democratization of information. But yeah, these are fundamental problems that will always exist with technology, with our current level of computer technology. We're no longer in the time of early Moore's law where a computer chip that cost $10,000 is going to cost $100 5 years from now. It is no longer that case, and the energy usage is not dropping quickly either. So we need to demand that these things are built sustainably. It does not just exacerbate bigger problems that already exist.
In the back of the green.
Yeah. So today's neoliberal education seems to be following the banking model, which Paulo Freire critiques, where the teacher knows everything and student knows nothing. So AI seems to be drawing in this line where the model knows everything and there is a knowledge dumping. So is there any scope where AI can be reimagined to become more like a problem-posing model of education?
I didn't catch the last part.
So is there any scope where AI can be reimagined in the sense of a problem posing model where there is a dialogue between a teacher, student, and there is not just like where the knowledge is being filled into an empty vessel.
Well, I think Jeff's a good example of that, right? I mean, the kind of dialectic that Jeff has with GPT Hegel, if I do it right, is this kind of question and answer, sort of Socratic model of questioning and response. And you can ask GPT to give you questions, I'm told, and I've seen, right? Still, I think the banking model point that you make about education kind of brings up two other issues for me. One is, there's been this long debate, at least 100 years, if you wanted to short date it, about whether or not education is merely passing on information and factoids, right? You've got these empty students in front of you, and you're a bank with all the money, and you just dispense knowledge into them. And what critical pedagogists who favour democracy that supports the flourishing of liberal democratic societies have always proposed is that it's really misguided. Actually, part of what classrooms do is they reproduce the culture of the society as a whole. So, 120 years ago, you got people like Dewey worrying that this really passive consumption model in the classroom is teaching future citizens to be passive in the face of authority, not to ask questions, not to actually be actively engaged in their own education, just to sit there passively and listen. And I worry that we're doing that right now, we're doing it again with LLMs. And so if we're going to have them, I think we do need to be thinking, how do you get critical pedagogy into a classroom that also has LLMs in it? Or if it's going to be this fully online, you're in your room alone with some headphones on talking to it, how can we create the best experience machine of a classroom full of different people who disagree, who you respect and feel that you have obligations to care and listen to in order to create that actual sort of cultural and acculturation space. Right? A lot of things that students struggle with when they come to university is that they don't have family who've gone before, and they don't know what office hours are, and they are unfamiliar with various sort of the soft norms, right, of education. The banking model in the classroom fails to pass on any of that sort of engagement. So I do think we should be worried about that. I do think we can have Socratic engagement with them at this level, but we're still not at the point where you're, citizen in a liberal room, right, with a bunch of people who disagree, and that you're learning to respect and give them room to, right, so that they can share their ideas, and you respect them enough to listen to them even if you disagree with them. I don't know. So I don't know how we get to that next step. I actually would prefer we don't do it with the AI, because I don't want us to be living in our rooms. As much as I largely live a life of solitude on a mountain, I understand that most people like a lot of human interaction and benefit from it. And if they don't have that, they need really strong connection to nature. So if we destroy the environment and you don't see other people, that sounds really bad. But yeah, point well taken.
Well, all right. Well, to keep things spicy, we're also again to, and since you mentioned the Hegelian LLM, so let me just give you an example. This is one model, and someone was saying, Rose, maybe think of this. So I just wrote a book on scientific discovery and gaming, and there are people doing protein design using this free open source programming called Foldit. And it's not just the guy using it or the person using it and the AI. It's really, and there's this Twitch stream of this. It's this streamer I'm thinking of. He's modeling the protein, and then the AI models it. And then other people on the stream suggest things, or on his team suggest things, and then he goes back, and then the AI comes in and does it, and then he comes back. It's a very intimate dialectical engagement. It's like a co-creation of knowledge between him, other people, and the AI. Every night at 5 o'clock, I work on SimBrain. I've been working on this is 30 years now, almost working on this, with a guy, with Yulin Lee down in San Diego. It's me, Yulin, and multiple AI systems, and we're co-creating. And it's not just there's the AI and what it knows and me and what I know. It's a different thing. It's another thing. And I think that can be taken to the classroom. I'm not going to say I'm completely against the banking model. I think to some extent, as an instructor, there's stuff I want to teach, and I'm going to put that, trying to get it from my brain to your brain. I think some of that is true. I've always got these middle positions, but I also think, I try in the classroom. It's very hard, especially in the neoliberal era. The TAS budget pressure, I got bigger and bigger classrooms, but I still, there's Molly, there's Jessica, there's Ethan, There's, Sasha, I mean, Jonathan, I try to meet everybody, hear what they're saying. You just had this great contribution yesterday in class, Derek, I think you teach this way too. One of our esteemed writing professors here. I mean, I know you know all your students. I think we could do that and have the AI in there with us to some extent. This is where Derek and I disagree. Maybe I'm the only one, but I think it can be a kind of open exchange, a kind of this is getting a little, a new information organism, human machine symbiosis thing. I think we can go for that, but carefully and with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Rose, would you like the last word?
Yeah.
I'll agree with genuine co-creation is an amazing thing, and that the interactions between humans and technology have led to revolutions in society and many, many wonderful things. The life I lead would not be possible without incredible technology. My concern is that co-creation in education between a student and AI is difficult and impossible for one of the reasons that I wrote, especially when that AI has all the content coming from a large part of the current society.
I'm afraid we will have to end there, but please join me in thanking you for this fantastic conversation along with our panelists.